Just how serious RBI was about signaling something was deeply wrong with Paytm Payments Bank was clear in the timing of its action. Main Street usually swings the axe on weekends to minimize damage to the financial system. But it took aim at Paytm Bank on a Wednesday, that too just a day before the budget, putting a complete stop on Paytm Bank from accepting any new deposits. Since payment banks have a limited footprint and are catered to by other rival apps, they were unworried about a wider financial contagion effect. These rivals will now look to feast on Paytm Bank's remains, as RBI gave no indication of softening its stance. The action set off a panic among millions of merchants and users of Paytm's UPI service, and especially amongst its 60 million FASTag users who couldn't recharge their accounts. Meanwhile, down south, another mighty elephant tottered, Byju's. That something was wrong with Byju's became apparent when it didn't file its 2022 annual reports even a year after the deadline. Byju Ravindran, it seemed, had been cooking its accounts. And when it bought Akash in April 2021 for about $1 billion, it was probably with the last piece of cash he had left, because he knew that this offline business would be the only one piece of Byju still standing, while all around Ravindran's online fortress crumbled. In Byju's case, it was not the regulators, but his three major investors who pressured him by resigning from the board, putting out a statement.
Over time, its reporting and governance.
Despite repeated efforts, Byju disregarded advice.
In Feb 2024, when he couldn't afford even to pay salaries and his valuation dropped from a peak of $22,000 million to $200 million, 1% of that 2 years later, the remaining investors got together and tried to kick the 44-year-old Ravindran out of the company. Both companies, once a beacon for startups, now face an uncertain future. As these two companies navigate this uncertainty, they are not the only ones navigating uncertain waters. For many of us, navigating today's media landscape can feel just as daunting. That's why we are working with Ground News for today's content. They are an app and a website that lets you easily compare how any individual story in the news is being covered by different sources around the globe. But their unique innovation can best be understood in the political spectrum with the bias bar, factuality rating and ownership details they provide, which allow you to draw your own conclusions about potential bias in the media. Take for example this story about the rumors of Kangana Ranaut consuming beef. Using Ground News, you can see that 14 news sources are reporting on this story, of which half are left-leaning, while only one source on the right has bothered to counter this rumor. Scrolling further, I can see that Hindustan Times broke the news, but that most follow-ups were not Indian news media, but foreign news outlets. You can click on left to see which leading publications covered it, and similarly with center and right as well. Mixed factuality suggests that these publications don't always use proper sourcing or may use loaded language that alters the context. I can similarly search for other topics like the Israel-Palestine conflict, stories on Elon Musk, or the US elections. Go to ground.news/bizboworld and use the link to get 40% off the Vantage plan. I think Ground News is doing important work and I hope you'll check them out. Paytm was a success pretty much from the time it was launched in 2009 as a directory service, paying homage to MTNL by calling itself 197, the number people dialed for MTNL's directory inquiry. The dynamic 45-year-old Vijay Shekhar Sharma soon added so many services that legacy banks got worried that this Johnny-come-lately would destroy their business. They saw when Uber was stopped from processing credit card payments outside India, how Paytm stepped in and partnered with them for a quick payment system. In 2015, they pioneered the ubiquitous QR code and further revolutionized payments. And after demonetization in 2016, customers began flocking to their cleanly designed digital payment system, posing the banks yet another threat. Banks were now even more worried because through UPI, third-party apps like Paytm could develop a direct relationship with their hardened customers and bypass them. Even so, they had no choice but to partner with them, as Paytm had over 100 million wallet accounts by then, more than what some banks had. And their Paytm Karo campaign became a spontaneous lexicon in every Indian language.
Paytm Karo.
The peak for the company was in November 2021, when they went in for their overpriced $2 billion plus IPO, by which time the cracks were showing. However, even as far back as 2016, the then RBI governor knew
Innovative firms like Paytm are not always comfortable with regulators, but we want to see where they push the system.
And push, they did. RBI took counter push to make sure that their closed-loop QR code system would be interoperable, that is scannable by any other payment app. Regulators were also worried about how Paytm and Paytm Bank use the same software, networking systems, data center and offices, even though RBI guidelines need enablers and banks to be on an arm's length basis. But the real fight came when RBI strengthened KYC norms, the bedrock of modern banking. That is a regulatory missile against shady businesses, money laundering and other nefarious activities. But for Paytm, payments was likely seen as just an enabler for their lucrative marketplace of 39 million merchants through which to build profitable side businesses in lending, brokerage, gold, games and banking. So they aggressively onboarded customers without verifying KYC, inadvertently allowing at least 50,000 accounts to be used as piggy banks for dodgily earned cash. Crooks took advantage of this laxity and opened 1,000 wallets on a single PAN card, with many keeping more cash balance than the mandated 1 lakh. Seen by the public as legit, panel operators of Mahadev app accepted bets only through UPI and created over 8 lakh such accounts using fake KYCs, thus making sure that investigators would hit a digital dead end should they start looking for who's really getting the loot. The 5.39 crore $662,000 penalty imposed on them in October 2023 was their fourth warning since 2017. But clearly, none of these were taken seriously enough, maybe feeling that with 350 million wallets, Paytm Bank was now untouchable. The huge investment of the Chinese company Alibaba also concerned the ministry, who refused them certain approvals in early 2023. Byju's meanwhile thrived during lockdown and cash rich on vaulting valuations bought competitors from all over the world, hired SRK as brand ambassador and sponsored the Indian cricket team's jersey, though he has yet to pay BCCI 158 crore. Startups wanted to be the next Byju, but they were criticized for their hard sell to parents who forked out huge sums due to FOMO for their kids. Then their accounting innovation came to light, how multi-year cost receipts were taken as income in the current year to lessen losses. Once they corrected that, their losses plunged from 232 crore to 4,500 crore the next year and further worsened to 8,000 plus crore the year after. Then even as his ship was sinking, showing very bad judgment, and despite the heavy cash burn, Byju signed Lionel Messi as global brand ambassador at a cost of $15 to $20 million for a 3-year deal in November 2022. This extravagance forced him to sell the companies he had accumulated, all his offices except the Bengaluru HQ, and even his personal home, to pay months-long outstanding salaries after already pumping in $1.1 billion. Then in an effort to ring-fence his crown jewel Akash, he allowed Manipal's group Rajan to convert his debt into equity in Akash, giving him a majority 40% stake. The other shareholders filed a suit to stop the conversion at this lowered valuation of around $600 million, far lower than its acquisition price of $950 million paid in 2021. Though even this reduced valuation seems too high, considering Byju's wider troubles and Akash's standalone profit of 330 crore. Anyhow, unable to service his $1.2 billion loan, his overseas lenders and other investors filed an insolvency petition against Byju's parent company, Think and Learn in Bengaluru. Then in an underhand move, the wily Ravindran floated a $250 million rights issue at 1% of peak valuation, which meant that if the existing shareholders did not invest more, they could have their billions wiped out. Because were Ravindran to fill the gap himself, he would effectively take over their stakes and by default, the company by stealth. The same thing happened during PharmEasy's right issue, which was done at a 90% cut in valuation and in which the same investor Ranjan Pai was involved. Meanwhile in Paytm, Sharma resigned from the board of Paytm Bank, in which he still owns 51%, but will continue to lead 197 Communications, which owns the Paytm brand and app. But Ravindran has refused to resign and instead appointed a new CEO in his place, though he took over the reins again in just a few days. Going forward, the Paytm app will serve only as a third-party application provider for UPI transactions like PhonePe, GPay, etc., but with a far smaller market share. A large part of Paytm's revenue comes from lending commissions for the 35,000 crore worth loans given to their 39 million merchants on their marketplace, So keeping them is imperative. And even though the average ticket size of merchant loans is more than that of consumers, more revenue comes from their consumer-facing side like buy now, pay later, device rental to merchants, etc. 197 claims that RBI's decision would have a worst-case impact of 300 to 500 crore of its future earnings. All this drama gave Paytm shares a severe beating, making it fall from its anyway inflated IPO price of 2150 to a low of 325. Byju's and Paytm's troubles affected the market rates of other unlisted startups like PharmEasy, Ixigo, Boat and Oyo. Investors now prefer the safety of other unlisted companies like Chennai Super Kings on National Stock Exchange, where they see more value. Ronnie Screwvala, a Byju competitor and notable critic, wants to wish away the problem. I think one rotten apple in India does not darken the cloud. But the truth is that
EdTech goes in and out of favor. It's a really hard sector to get profitable. But the bigger issue is about transparency and governance.
even Byju's main rival Unacademy isn't in great shape. All its 13 acquisitions are now dead or marginal, and it is pivoting to offline. Physicswala, the other EdTech unicorn, is the only profitable one with 9 crore. But it too faces margin pressure as it moves offline. Complicating things for Byju's is that now ED is also on its heels over foreign exchange violations, and whether the company can survive or not is debatable. It is believed that if one pursues Saraswati, the goddess of knowledge, then Lakshmi, the goddess of wealth, follows suit. But this does not seem so in Byju's case. In the case of Paytm, RBI followed the policy of talk softly but carry a big stick. But was RBI's stick a bit too big? Because this is not the first time their actions were hard on merchants and consumers. Their poorly implemented recurring payments and tokenization on credit cards continue to give grief to many online subscription sellers and consumers. While forced data localization on payments could as easily have been mirrored in India. And the bane of loan app frauds continues in the absence of a long delayed white list of apps. But what scares markets the most is that with one swipe, one of the largest fintech businesses has been mauled without recourse. BizBo's Limerick. The startup world turns upside down with one-time unicorns no more renowned. Regulatory woes and investors turn foes tell a cautionary tale of hubris uncrowned. You will also find these sources listed in our video description section.